Feels weird. Long story short, 10 plus years of marriage and 3 young children. I have been restless and unhappy and went seeking an affair. Had a brief one that was okay, nothing to write home about. Thought about another when H found out. I hate that I hurt him, but there are reasons I did this. Some I understand, some I don't. And we are going to seek counseling and all of that, but I don't know that I want to be married anymore. It's a good marriage, by most accounts. We see eye to eye on most things, we are friends, and there is no lack of attention or affection from him. I just don't want it anymore. And I don't know why. I ache from wanting to touch other people and experience true, heart-pounding desire again. And I hate living up to someone else's expectations all the time, whether they are real or perceived. I will always have to be accountable to my children, but I no longer want to be accountable to any other adults besides myself. I want to run my household my way and just be alone. So many stupid little things about him bug me, and I know full well it's me, not him. I know that. He hasn't changed, but I have. A lot. My views and ideals have changed immensely, and what I think I want from my life has changed a lot. I don't want the trappings of a house and material goods. It all seems so damn overwhelming all the time. We will give this a try. We will see if we can make it work. But I just don't know. Comments. Running away from the life you created with your husband is a very cowardly thing to do. It wasn't as if you were forced to lay down and have his kids, buy the house, etc. You actively chose every single bit of it. Now you don't want it anymore. It's a fantasy, taking your ball and going home. Walking away without consequence. Yes, you can choose that too, but there are many more people that you stand to hurt by doing it. Can you live with that? You're not missing life, you're living it. The problem is that through your affairs, you've become a love junkie, looking for that next fix. And like a junkie, you're likely to find yourself 20 years down the road still looking for that next fix. You'll be older, covered with liver spots, and be wondering why you threw it all away. Get help now. You truly need it. Having affairs was a fun way for you to avoid all of your problems. You don't like your life, so you want to create a second pretend life where no one criticizes you. You're always getting compliments. And no one has to fight over whose turn it is to clean up the vomit when the kids get sick. You can get a divorce, but your core problem is going to follow you wherever you go. You imagine that somewhere around the corner there's an existence that's fabulously better than your own. Maybe if you run fast enough away from your problems, eventually you'll catch it. Just fill your husband in on your plans first, so that he can make fully informed choices about what dreams he would like to pursue. OP responds, deciding that I am not happy in my marriage and choosing to leave it. If I do indeed do that, is it not cowardly? Is it any more brave to stay in a marriage in which I am unhappy and bring us both down? I'd say that leaving it and giving us both a fighting chance at happiness again would be less cowardly. But I still can't be absolutely sure that's what I want to do. I was opening up, saying what I really feel and want right now. But that is exactly why we are going to counseling. Because I am not stupid and not willing to throw everything away without fully exploring the alternatives. I owe it to him, to myself, and to my children to make every effort to make a go of it. And that's what I intend to do. We cannot help our feelings. They are what they are. I know we need help, and I will say, he is not blameless in this marriage. Things like this don't happen in a vacuum. He's been good, but he has his issues too. That's what we are seeking. I would say my husband appears to be more understanding than anyone on this board so far. Although I don't believe I am a love junkie. Not yet, although I do see the potential risk. What I really think is that I do want to be alone, and if I were to get out of this marriage, I wouldn't be seeking any long-term relationship anytime soon. I simply cannot fathom wanting to be married again ever. But yes, my husband actually appears to understand all of this better than anyone who has replied thus far. He told me I need my support network just as much as he needs his. I thought this might be the place. Not so sure now. He is currently fully informed. And no, I don't actually believe that there is some fabulous existence waiting for me. I have envisioned exactly what it would be like to separate, and I know how hard it would be to split finances and time with the kids. I've seen my own parents go through it, and it actually turned out to be the best thing for all parties involved. Funny, marriage isn't always the answer. I'm not in any fog. I am not in love or in lust with anyone at the moment. Technically, he's done everything right. I am well aware of that and have told him as much. We are being utterly, completely honest with each other at the moment. That's what marriage comes to sometimes for either party, and feeling bad about something is very different from feeling guilt. I don't feel guilt, but I do feel terrible that I hurt him. It may sound paradoxical to some, but it's not. My post, admitting what I did and what it felt like, contained complete honesty. That's why I am here and will be going to counseling to understand what I did, why I did it, and what it all means. So I spoke honestly and from the heart. He is being wonderful, and we are talking things through daily. The problem with a message board such as this is that no matter how much of your story you tell, there is always more to it. My husband said something tonight that struck such a chord with both of us. We were rendered speechless and had to just go away from each other to digest a little piece of the puzzle. We had a third child, who was an unexpected pregnancy without family in the area and not much of a support system. We were already pushed to the limit with 2 kids. But even though I am very much pro-choice, I felt like we didn't have a choice here. We were parents. We knew how to be parents, and we were financially stable enough to handle it. I didn't feel I could live with myself if we aborted, so we didn't. And he's been harboring resentment about this for several years because she's a tough kid and she pushes us to our stress levels all the time. She has some minor developmental delays that manifest themselves as behavioral issues. We are working with early intervention on those, but it's been really hard. There has been an undercurrent from him for several years of, well, this was your choice, you have to deal with it. He spoke about that tonight, of realizing that the expectations he's put on me to handle her and to be the primary caregiver have been unfair. He understands now that we both need support and help in raising our children. To handle it and to suck it up when it's been hard have really damaged us. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. I am still crying now, but I don't feel guilt. I don't know what got me to the place where I was willing to go so far, but I got there. And that is my responsibility now, to figure that out and see if it's fixable. If it's not, we will let each other go and find our happiness separately. But if it is, then I owe it to him to try. And that's what I will do. I will say this. I won't cheat on him again if we stay together. That in part is what counseling is for. Can we stay together for the long haul and be happy enough that neither of us turns to anyone else? I need to know that before I decide to stay, in the only way I can figure it out, with professional help. I also will never abandon my children, although I desperately want to be alone at times. My biggest obligation right now is to them. If we separate, we will split custody, no question. I am a child of divorce, and quite frankly, it can often be the best for all parties involved. It can take its toll on the kids, no question, but as long as the parents do their best to mitigate that toll, there isn't necessarily lasting damage. I don't intend to string him along, not at all. But we both need to figure out what we want, what we can live with, before we call it quits. We are agreed on that. He knows all of these feelings and thoughts. I haven't said anything here that I haven't said to him, including the non-guilt bit. I am couching my words with him carefully, not to string him along, but because I think we need to be in counseling for that, where it's safe to completely open up and have a mediator there to help us. I have felt very trapped in my relationship for a long time. And although I pride myself on being very open and straightforward, I found it very hard to say to the man who's been my partner for 15+ years that I felt that way, that I was struggling and drowning in it, and that he and the kids and everything around me was part of the problem. So yes, I chose a path that was spectacularly unfair to him and hurt him deeply. I know that. And I do feel remorse for hurting him, but that's not necessarily the same as guilt over what I've done. Splitting hairs, maybe? But it's how I feel. What I can hope for, what I do hope for, is that bringing us to this point won't be all for naught. That we will both discover things about ourselves. Indeed, we already are. And that wherever we end up, we will be happier for it. I just don't know if marriage to each other is the ultimate answer. That remains to be seen. Let's start with the kids. I love them, don't get me wrong, but we are on our own here with no family and very little support. The third child was unplanned and has been a major issue. Despite being pro-choice, I was quite certain I couldn't live with myself if I aborted. But, by his own admission, my husband will say that he has resented me for something of a lateral decision. Even though it wasn't really. He was on the fence. But I was the one to make the final decision. Because in a tiebreaker like that, it had to be my decision in the end. Divorce wouldn't help that. I harbor no illusions about that. But it's put a strain on things. And yes, sometimes I want to step away from my life and just take a big old break from everyone. Now for the mirroring back part. From my perspective, it has felt like people are simply attributing false motives to me. That's where I become dismissive. Because I know it's not worth my time. It's not worth my time in this whole matter to become worried about that. But the just bored thing is a little much, so I had to speak to it. I was unhappy, and the restlessness I felt stemmed from unhappiness. But saying someone goes out and has an affair just to alleviate boredom is far too simplistic. I haven't asked him to cover it up or to keep quiet with anyone. I don't feel the right to do damage control, and I know he needs his own places to talk. We've also discussed individual counseling, but we're going to start with the couples counseling first and move from there. I know full well it isn't all about me in this whole situation. This particular post, however, was about me and indeed should be. What more can I offer him right now but the willingness to dig deep down into the ugly stuff and find out what happened? And some of that ugly stuff involves him and his attitudes toward me and my kids. I also know I will hear ugly stuff from his side and am prepared to do so. We're going to take it right down to the ground and then see if we can rebuild it. I come from a family where divorce was actually the answer, and it wasn't an abusive relationship. It was just a better choice for both parties involved, and in the end for the kids too. So I guess that's a bit of my perspective. I will still be there for my kids every single day. That's who I am most accountable to at the moment. I have two choices, stay with him or not stay with him. There's no staying with him and carrying on as things were. It's a bad idea for all involved. Despite perhaps coming across as uncaring when I say I don't feel guilt, all I am really after here is gaining an understanding of it all. I do still think that divorce is an option, and a viable one at that. I don't know if it's the right thing in my case, but I don't discount it. If that's what it comes to after we've tried, I want this, if that makes any sense. I'm not the sort of person who is constantly discontent and revels in it, or looks to be dissatisfied, so I want to be content in what I have, believe it or not, no matter what my actions say, and I've always been a go out and make your own happiness kind of girl. It's just that it somehow seems to have gotten lost, and I haven't found a good way to regain it. And one more little tidbit that I told my husband the other day before I ever started posting here. I am grateful for the opportunity to try to figure this out with him, whether we end up together or not. He could so easily withdraw into his own hurt and anger, and that would be bad for both of us. But he is not that sort of person, and I am truly grateful for that. Comments. I haven't cheated, but I often find myself thinking about whom I might date if we did get divorced. But I do understand your feelings about wanting to be alone. My husband and I have been married for almost 9 years, and have 2 children. There was one issue of my husband's that was a problem before we were married, and I naively thought it would change. It still hasn't, and it has made me feel so disconnected from him. A couple of years ago, we were living apart during the week for work-related reasons, so I got a taste of what life as a single mom would be like. It was very hard, but I also liked it. On the weekends, when my husband came home, it was so hard to get used to accommodating him again. It felt like he wasn't contributing to the family emotionally, and also just became one more person to cook for and clean up after. I found myself thinking that if we weren't together anymore, he'd at least be completely responsible for the kids every other weekend. I know too many other posters on here that sound selfish and immature of me to think it would be better for me alone, but you can never fully understand another person's relationship. Like OP, I want it to work, but after 9 years of being the cheerleader in the relationship, I'm tired. I know I used to try harder at the romance and everything else, but I've gone into survival mode. I do my best to see that my kids are happy and supported, but my husband feels more like a roommate than a husband or even a close friend. I feel like this, yet I can't talk to anyone about it because I still care enough about my husband that I don't want to air our dirty laundry to any of our family or anyone in our small town. Sadly, I don't have anyone I can trust to be confidential. I've tried talking to my husband, but he'll just try harder for a few days and then slide back to the way things were until my frustration builds enough to have another discussion that turns into an argument. Update: I don't hate my kids, but sometimes I resent them immensely. Having and raising kids is by far the hardest thing I've ever done, and people will say, oh well, it's the most rewarding too, but sometimes it's not. But I love them. Oh, when they are cute and funny and say things that have you in fits. It's the best, and you well up in love in a way that you will never, ever feel for anyone else. And fortunately, there's no way to bottle that feeling, to get you through the times when they whine and complain and are totally ungrateful for everything, which is a lot of the time. I personally think an open dialogue on what it's really like to have kids is important because we do have an emphasis on political correctness in this society, and it can make people feel like failures for not living up to that rosy ideal. No one who is not fully 100% wanting kids should have them. I'd like to leave mine by the roadside sometimes. But I wanted them desperately, had some infertility issues in the beginning, then had a surprise number 3. So I know that if I didn't have them, I'd be unhappy because I'd want kids. OP didn't post the final ending to their story because everyone kept bashing her. But I am pretty sure she divorced her husband. You know why? Because she doesn't love him and just constantly disrespects him. She puts her own feelings before anything and anyone, and I think this personality is not suitable for marriage. My wife and I met on a blind date. I was 18, she was 16. We were born 2 years and 360 days apart. Both of us are Scorpios. Due to the news, we were expecting a child. We ended up getting married while she was still in high school. Yes, very young. She finished school though, and gave birth to our first daughter in June of '89. 20 months later, she had our second daughter. The same day I got out of USN boot camp. We were a Navy family for 5 years. I first noticed something odd in her behavior in April of '93. I was going in for surgery to have my spleen removed due to an illness I contracted. The morning, she took me to the hospital. Before she left, she handed me a note. Once I read it, I was stunned. It was hate-filled and completely hit me out of the blue. One of the nurses saw the expression on my face and asked if I was okay. I couldn't say anything, just handed her the note, and she was flabbergasted by it. Once I got home from the hospital, she acted as if nothing ever happened, saying she was just scared and venting. Like every other couple, we had arguments about kids, money, life, etc. One constant fight we almost always had was about cleaning up around the house. I would help if asked, but it never really occurred to me to initiate cleaning up around the house. I'd never demanded a clean house, a meal on the table, etc. from her. For most of our marriage, she was a stay-at-home mom, which was by her choice. I encouraged her to get a job at the BX on numerous occasions, just to get out of the house. I ended up getting out of the Navy on disability in 1995. Went back to my old job, and we bought our first house. She got a job working nights at Wendy's. She would sometimes cook dinner before she left for work. After dinner was done, I had the kids clean up and got them ready for bed. And this is where the dumb young guy came out in me. I didn't really check the cleanup job they did. My wife usually had to do some cleanup when she got home, which I only found out recently when it was brought up during a conversation about our happiness in February. In 1998, My wife opened up a pizza place with her brother, who left it 6 months later. I took out a loan to actually buy the building and business. The business was 45 minutes from the house. The kids were still young and asked to see their mom every night, since the only time she got to see them was right before school. So I started taking them down there so they could visit with her during the slow periods. Since I was down there, I usually ended up helping where I could. There were occasional moments throughout our marriage where she would just explode without reason. Almost always caught me and the kids by surprise, as it was never predictable. But we still had family time and we were still fun. We also still had the occasional fights about the house. By this time, though, I had started to clean things without being asked. The problem was that it was never good enough, or I didn't do it the way she would have done it, and the results didn't matter. It was the same with the kids as well. After a while, I just reverted back to helping her when asked, since doing things on my own volition never seemed to work. In 1999, she gave birth to our third daughter. We also found out she was diabetic and learned that her fluctuating blood sugar could have caused the mood swings. After 9/11, her business dropped significantly, and I lost my job 3 times in a year due to the economic downturn. She had to close the business in 2002, and we had to file for bankruptcy. At the time, we lived in Ohio, and the entire state was hit hard by the downturn. This is when I feel I made the biggest mistake of my life. I forced a move to Florida in 2003. It seemed logical at the time, as the economy was still thriving, and we had enough money to make the move and live off of until we found jobs. However, my wife didn't want to move. I told her I was going with or without her, something I should never have done. The kids didn't like it at first, but in the long run, even they agree that the way I handled it was wrong. Eventually, we were able to get back to being a family. There were times when my wife would go out with our oldest daughter and some of her friends, who were all still teenagers, while I stayed at home with the other 2. She was the cool mom. The main problem during this time was with animals. She brought home a dog that was supposed to belong to my daughter's boyfriend. Without mentioning a word to me, I let that go. In 2007, we bought a house again. During this time, she allowed my daughter's boyfriend to move in, something I was not happy about but was told too bad since the boy had an abusive home life. So she was told. Also, our animal collection ballooned from 3 dogs to 7 dogs, 2 birds, and a ferret. Only the birds were discussed. During this time, the kids stopped helping around the house unless I got involved or their mom blew a gasket. Yes, we lost control of our house. Furthermore, the pet dander drove my allergies into overdrive to the point where my sinuses were bleeding. This is when I reverted to an old habit, residing in my bedroom. In the evenings when the kids went to bed, I would either watch TV or work on my computers, away from the things that aggravated me, such as pets and my daughter's boyfriend. I hid from the things I had no control over. It got to the point where it was overwhelming, and I asked my doctor to put me on medication to help me cope. While that helped in certain ways, it also made things worse. She would start cleaning something in another room, and if nobody got up to help, she would come into the room and get upset about it. Then I would go help. I would also say something to the kids about not helping their mom. This was a vicious cycle until February of 2009. The morning after the Super Bowl, I was rear-ended while sitting at a traffic light. I was left with permanent neck and back injuries and fought traumatic brain injury. From 2009 until late 2011, I went through numerous physical therapy and chiropractic sessions and even started acupuncture. I also became addicted to medication. I was also on a fairly strong antidepressant, due partly to the TBI. After the car accident, I changed. During the first 6 to 8 months after the accident, my wife really wouldn't let me do anything physical. Even throughout 2010, when she opened a small cafe, she wouldn't let me help with the remodeling. In mid-2011, she got rid of her business partner and took over sole ownership of her cafe. Now, she's never really been a morning person. Her cafe was supposed to open at 6:30 a.m. Seeing as how she could never get there on time, I decided I would go in and open for her. and she could come in between 7 and 7:15 so I could go to work. This is when I began to see how far gone I was and started making changes. I was 287 pounds and could barely sweep the floor without getting drenched. I also noticed she was unhappy. I had actually noticed this earlier, but I could never get her to talk about it, so I figured it was just my imagination. Between June and November, I had lost 40 pounds. I also tested the waters for a new job in Texas, one that I would never have taken if she didn't want to move. I had already learned that lesson, and I never even got to the interview stage. My wife used that as an excuse to go completely off the deep end. During Thanksgiving weekend, we had the mother of all fights, where she finally told me she wasn't happy and hadn't been for a long time. She also told me that a friend of hers, a retired firefighter, had brought her a business proposal to open up a new, larger restaurant, which was news to me. Then I flashed back to a point in October when money was tight. She told me he brought her $500 to help get her through the month. And alarms went off. During this time, our oldest daughter was working for my wife, and she was very vocal about not approving of how my wife and her new business partner acted around each other. Because of her lack of loyalty, the wife gave our daughter the cold shoulder for almost a month. And I've heard a number of comments about their behavior from customers as well. Adding to that, since November she's had her cell phone locked and has also been very secretive about who she talks to and who she sends messages to. In January, my grandmother passed away and our two youngest daughters and I were going to Ohio for the funeral. The wife refused to have dinner with our two daughters the night before we left, saying she didn't have the time. Yet the night before, she spent 2 hours with her business partner having dinner. In February, we did talk for a few minutes. I got to hear how she's been unhappy for 24 years, the complete laundry list of my failures, and how she's not sure if she wants to work to save the marriage. I realize I've made mistakes, but even our kids do not understand what their mother is doing or where she is coming from. At this point, due to the lack of honesty, I'm not sure I could even reconcile with her if she chose to. The trust issue has been completely broken down and I don't trust her. Recent text messages of hers that I have seen point to an affair. She's told me she has no desires, but messages to her friends are just the opposite. The last time we bonded was on Thanksgiving morning right before the big fight that evening. If she was so unhappy, what was that about? She initiated it. From August to now, I have lost 70 pounds and am no longer on any medication. I did this for myself as I realized the medication made me not care about anything, which is not normal. That's a realization I wish my wife would come to. My biggest issue is honesty. She tells me we're working things out, yet I have proof that she's planning to leave and circumstantial proof that she's at least in an emotional affair and most likely a full-blown physical affair. I told her when this started that if there was no hope, she should tell me and I could handle it. It would hurt, but I'm not gonna try to force someone to love me. This is where I'm having the biggest problems, the lack of honesty. Well, that and the way she's treating our daughters who have picked up on it and question her about it. Granted, these two children are adults, and our problems don't really concern them. However, my feeling is that she reacts the way she does to them because they are hitting too close to the truth of the matter. For me, right now, I'm doing a good job at playing oblivious. And while I realize she's had to make the decision for having an emotional or physical affair or both, I really want to give her partner the butt-kicking of his life. He tells everyone he's my friend, but he's not. And I suppose there's a chance I'm wrong about the who part of this, but all signs point to this person, even though she never mentions his name in her text messages to friends. Nor does she mention specific acts when texting him. What I really don't understand is this: he's 16 years older and on his 6th marriage that is ending. Why does she think she'll be any different? Why didn't she feel comfortable talking to me about her unhappiness? She sure as hell talked to him. He told me as much, which is when I first began to suspect the emotional affair. Looking to remove all safety nets? When she falls, it's going to be hard, fast, and ugly without me there to pick up the slack. My current plan is to do a little more recon. I found out that the other man is at Bike Week in Pensacola and is buying her some fun stuff. She's told me for a while that she's too tired to want anything, yet she told a friend recently that her drive is off the scale. I also found out that he's a controlling piece of crap. His current wife has been told a number of times that she'll never find anyone to treat her as good as he does, and that she cannot have any male friends while he can have all the female friends he wants. What I'm looking for in terms of recon is a little more concrete evidence of a physical affair. The emotional affair is an absolute lock. Once I get this evidence, I plan to see an attorney and set things in motion. I was originally planning my D-Day for Monday or Tuesday, but it's looking more like Thursday now. I'm also planning to give the other man's wife a copy of the evidence. She has suspected the same things since December as well. I've started to stash money as well. As for recon, I'm watching, listening, and taking in other people's input. I've also installed a GPS tracker on my phone and leave it in her truck in the evenings. Technically, the truck is in my name, so I can track it anywhere it goes. Legally, the other man is out of town right now and is due back tomorrow. I also have the PIN to her iPhone, which she doesn't know about. Or maybe she does. She stated in a text to the other man last night that she keeps her phone on her at all times and deletes these messages as they come in. Yet, here I am with pictures of her messages taken with my phone. She works 18-hour days right now, trying to get her restaurant on its feet, so when she sleeps, she's like a rock. While I was at my office this morning, our 21-year-old daughter, who is emotionally about 17, called crying her head off. She had gotten into her mother's phone and saw the messages. She had suspected something for a while. I kind of scolded her for doing that, and I suspect it's not the first time either. Anyway, this changed my schedule. The following was done very calmly, with no yelling. When I arrived back at the house, I woke W up from sleep. I reminded her that she had said that if I ever asked to see her phone, she would let me. She asked why I wanted to see it, and I told her that I've had a number of people come to me with suggestions that there was more going on than just a business partnership, and I know how secretive she is with her phone. I also said that if there was nothing on there, she wouldn't care if I saw it. I didn't see a reason for discussion. She asked if we were really going to do this, and I said yes. She still wouldn't give me the PIN to her phone. I told her that if that was the way it was going to be, I wanted a divorce. She panicked and asked how that would work since she can't support herself. She couldn't afford to be on her own right now. I told her that was her problem since she's the one who set this all in motion. She accused me of trying to control her and make her change who she is. I told her she was wrong, that I was finally looking out for myself and not worrying about whether I said or did anything to upset her. I told her that since this all started last fall, I haven't allowed myself one moment of peace. I've had no fun and have been completely stressed out because I didn't want to lose her, only to be strung along with the I-don't-knows. I told her that I've had a big problem with the secrecy. The secrecy aspect of how she carries on, how she's become emotionally withdrawn from our marriage, and that I was sick and tired of being a safety net for her. I told her that when she fights with other men, she starts getting closer. But when they're getting along, she starts becoming more withdrawn again. I asked for the PIN again, and she still wouldn't give it. So I told her what her PIN was and started quoting several text messages, all of which she tried to brush off as being a big joke. I told her there was no humor in an emotional affair, and that most of her text messages suggested far more than just a running joke between friends. Other men were talking about our daughter, which was completely inappropriate. She's starting to really anger me. She needs to be homeless and on her own to learn the hard way. She said it was all in fun, a big joke, and it all meant nothing. I told her it was inappropriate, disrespectful, and immoral, especially since she knows the other man is married as well, and his marriage is also in a rough patch. I also warned her that if that piece of crap says one word to any of my kids, she'd need a new business partner, and I would be behind bars. Don't mess with my kids. She insists nothing is going on with her or anyone else, physically. I told her to step outside of her sphere of reality and try to look back at the last few months to understand where the rest of us are coming from, and she just might see what we do. I told her that if she wasn't willing to stop that behavior, at least come to the table and try to work things out. If not, I was gonna see an attorney next week. I told her it wasn't my first choice, that I want to get the connection back we used to have. She said she didn't think it was possible, and I told her that since she emotionally checked out of the relationship a long time ago, she may well be right. She asked if I had talked to the other man's wife, who takes care of their horses. I told her I only asked if she ever discussed her marital issues with our daughter, and she said no. However, she did mention how the other man was doing the schedule for the 2 owners and 1 manager, and that he told his wife that opening the restaurant on Sunday was my wife's idea and not his. This was a huge lie since my wife never wanted to work 7 days a week. She knows she can't count on the other man to work his fair share. At this point, I had to leave to take our daughter to work with the horses, and we got in the shower to get cleaned up for work. I talked to the other man's wife for a while and told her what I did. I also sent her copies of the pictures I took of my wife's text messages, which my wife does not yet know about. By the time I got back home, the other man's wife sent me a text asking if I came to talk to her. She said she only dropped our daughter off. She forwarded a text from him saying, "We set him up, we'll explain later, got to go ride." She then asked me if I knew what it meant. I told her no, but I would find out. So I went down to the wife's restaurant and asked her for a moment. I asked if she talked to the other man about our conversation. She said yes. I said, "Okay, what does this mean?" and showed her the text. She said she didn't know. I asked if the crap on her phone was a lame attempt at getting a laugh out of someone. She said they had talked about her being concerned about someone looking in her phone. I threw the BS flag immediately, told her that was the lamest cover story ever. And if it were actually true, why did you hesitate to give me the pin? Why didn't you come out and give it to me? Let me read and then watch my reaction. I told her she knows she has a daughter who is an emotional wreck from the last few months. What in the hell would you prove by setting her up? She fiercely denied she would do something like that. I asked her again if it was a setup. She said no. She tried to deflect by saying she was tired and was having problems thinking straight, which got no sympathy from me. I told her I would let the other man's wife know that we don't have any idea what he's saying, and she can chalk it up to another lie by her sociopath husband. Later in the day, one of her regular customers saw me getting gas and said, "I just want you to know I don't approve of the way she's made your personal lives public." I told her I didn't understand what she meant. She said, "She's told anybody who would listen that you never treated her right, never bought her anything, and never took care of her. Lots of people saw how hard you worked to help her at her old restaurant, and know that's a lie." It's been an interesting day. I did take our youngest daughter to have dinner with the other man about 5 p.m. She's still there, and I'm wondering if he's planning on going someplace else tonight. She's the one who's having an emotional affair, and maybe even a physical affair. She checked out emotionally a long time ago, regardless of my efforts. She's the one with the pin lock on her phone to keep me out of it. Even though some of her employees know it, I'm far from perfect. I've never said I didn't play a part in what has happened in my marriage. It's a two-way road. The difference is I was trying to work it out with virtually zero participation from her. I admit, breaking into her phone could be considered a violation of trust. So can her secrecy, her flirting with other men, her telling me she's too tired to have any desires, yet telling her friends she's so horny she doesn't know what to do with herself. Am I bitter? Probably. This midlife crisis or whatever it is she's going through has done quite a bit of damage to my family. And I do tend to take that personally. The next day she denied everything. I was talking to her brother yesterday about a computer problem and told him I hadn't had time to look into anything since I was dealing with domestic issues. He said she had told him and he apologized about the way things had happened. She evidently told her brother a week or so ago that she was ready to move on, that she couldn't tell him what she was doing, just beginning to live for herself. He took that as she was having an affair. She called him complaining about my getting into her phone and confronting her about the text messages, which he knew nothing about. He told her that, based on their earlier talk, he thought she was screwing around, which she adamantly denies still. She told him and me that it was all a bunch of joking between friends. 2 friends at her restaurant and their drunk male friend who was out of town. Her brother didn't know the content of the text messages and asked why I was so upset. So I told him about 2 of them, which he agreed were not appropriate to be sent between a married woman and another married man. I told him that he was her brother and I didn't want him to take sides in this. We both have a hand in our marriage getting to the place it is, but the signs had been there for a while. To top it all off, the other man's wife hadn't heard from him much for several days. Several days went by while W and another man talked extensively, but very little of their conversations were related to business. Last night, W and I had several heated discussions, including one about our daughter's recent behavior of using her phone inappropriately. Our daughter suffered a head injury in a car accident in July, and she has gone through a similar issue back in 2009. I understand some of the struggles she is facing, but she still should not have engaged in impulsive behavior. I can relate, as I once ate food off of other people's trays at McDonald's. I am currently working on getting her into counseling, as it is clear that she needs it. During our discussions, she questioned why I found it hard to believe that her interactions with another man were just jokes. I countered by asking her where it was appropriate for her to be sending and receiving explicit text messages to someone else, especially when she was not willing to work on our marriage. I told her that if our marriage was truly over, she should just be honest and we can start planning for a divorce. She responded with a challenging attitude, as if she thought I was bluffing. W was upset that I went through her phone, claiming that I violated her trust. I acknowledged this, but also pointed out that her recent actions made it necessary for me to do so. I also mentioned that if she had given me the PIN to her phone, the situation could have been resolved quickly. However, the messages I saw were completely unacceptable. We had spent a lot of time discussing the importance of having a phone lock, but she wouldn't even let me see her phone. She said she thought I trusted her, and I did for a while. But then she started pulling away from me, only engaging with me when she was fighting with the other man. She completely stopped discussing our relationship, while I heard from people close to her that she was bad-mouthing me in public. If there was truly nothing for me to be concerned about, then why did she have a locked phone? Finally, she admitted that she thought we had grown too far apart to save our marriage. I told her that the difference between us was that I was willing to work on it and see if it could be saved, while she had given up a long time ago. She is still trying to cover things up, though. Back in March, she talked in her sleep about a man confessing his love for her and wanting to help her find a place of her own. When I confronted her about this the next morning, she claimed that she and her nephew had discussed getting a place together, which he later denied. Now, she is saying that it was her sister in Kentucky who had that conversation with someone. I also confronted the other man about this in March, and he admitted to wanting to help her find a place, but denied the rest of the conversation. Regardless of the issue, all I want is the truth, but the excuses she comes up with are so unbelievable that it makes my head spin. This whole weekend could be used as an example in a midlife crisis for dummies book. She even gave me a speech about how I just want her to stop being herself. I couldn't help but laugh. I clarified that I just wanted her to show me and our relationship more attention than she gives to other people. I even asked for just a few hours of one day per week to try and rebuild our relationship, but all I got was an "I'll try" response. She claimed to be too busy, and when I do serve her with divorce papers, it will most likely be at her restaurant where she knows and is friends with the deputies. None of this makes me feel good, and I haven't been able to sleep for days, constantly second-guessing everything, but I know that can't continue living like this. My comment looks like OP is going to be serving her at the workplace. If your partner did this, would you do the same? Comment down below how you would serve them, and I'm going to finish the second video.